You read the title, and I'm dead serious. I know Skyline and GTR fanboys aren't remotely prepared to entertain such an idea, but hear me out. Number one, I don't think the R35 GTR is the true successor to the R34 Skyline. The R34 Skyline actually has a successor that only exists in Japan. The succession to the R35 is really only in Nissan internal code. Number two, the R35 never even represented the same value proposition or the same sort of versatility that the Skyline platform offered. And number three, I'm actually one of the very few people in the country who have gotten to experience a Hakosuka Skyline, along with having ridden in every Skyline of the 90s except the R33. I've driven an R35 and I've also driven a G80 M3. And the G8X platform, in spirit, is much more similar to the Skylines of the 90s than the GTRs of today, and hold the same spot within the cultural zeitgeist.
Hi guys, I'm Shmi and you're watching Vinstagram.
First of all, Nissan doesn't even call the GTR a Skyline, and that's for good reason. The Nissan Skyline was a semi-affordable sedan platform that represented a more premium offering from Nissan over the Altima and Sentra before the Infiniti brand came about. Now, if you were thinking about heading straight to the comments and telling me that they had Infinitis in the 90s because that's when you think Skylines came about, then you aren't even a real Skyline fanboy. See, Skyline was borderline its own brand. It was Infiniti before Infiniti, and honestly, I don't even know why they didn't just flesh out the Skyline brand instead of even coming up with Infiniti in the first place. Because the Skyline name actually has legacy. It goes back even further than the Hakosuka. Believe it or not, the Hakosuka was actually the third generation of Skyline, but the first generation of Nissan Skyline. At first, you had the Prince Motor Company, who made the first two generations of Skylines, marketed as Japanese luxury cars that didn't really have a whole lot of horsepower and are about as far of a cry from the Skylines of the 90s as the R35 GTRs are, in my opinion. But when Nissan and Prince merged in 1967, Nissan liked the Skyline name and kept it around for a third generation. This was the C10 or Hakosuka. But the reason this was the first significant generation of Skyline is because it was the first good looking one, if you ask me, but more importantly, it was the first generation to bear the GTR badge. Now pay close attention because this pattern goes back almost 60 years. Notice how the GTR starts off as a normal Skyline sedan, more premium than the rest of the Nissan lineup, sure, but at the end of the day, a regular 4-pot family sedan. Then it gets a slightly faster 4-cylinder version, then an inline 6 version, then an even faster inline 6 version, then an even faster inline 6 version. Whoa, we're talking about the Nissan Skyline, by the way. The Skyline GTR with glorious individual throttle body sent a whopping 160 horsepower through that S20 inline 6. So how did this become a dedicated sports car with over 500 horsepower from an engine that isn't even remotely similar, that costed almost $90,000 at its very cheapest point? It didn't. It was killed and then became a victim of stolen valor. I'm gonna skip over the 4th generation that you definitely didn't know existed and you probably don't care about anyways. I'm also gonna skip over the 5th gen, which didn't get a GTR trim, the 6th gen because it was ugly, past the 7th gen, the R31, because let's be honest, y'all didn't care until you saw the more modern Skylines in Fast and Furious anyways. But throughout all these generations, notice how they all had a base trim 4-door, 2-door, and wagon variant, with different trim levels of varying performance and affordability. Stay focused, we're still talking about the Nissan Skyline, and like I said, the reason you even care about the 90s Skylines, the R32, 33, and 34, is because of this. In the 90s, Nissan was building really good engines, and by the 2000s, the aftermarket was huge. People were building these cars to smack down on V8s. JDM fans in the States were trying to import these cars into America because they were going faster than the muscle cars while also turning corners better, and they just came from factory oozing with tuning potential due to having 1 or 2 turbos depending on the trim. Now, granted, these cars, even in their GTS-T, GTS-4, but certainly GTR trims, costed more than American muscle and pony cars, but that's expected. It's wild to me how people will relentlessly hype these cars up like they were the cheapest thing ever, but they made all the power and they were supercar killers. Guys, they were the Japanese 3 Series, similar wheelbase and everything. They were priced like a 3 Series back then, and adjusted for inflation, they would have been priced like a 3 Series today. And they weren't sold outside of Japan on a large scale, probably because nobody was buying these over a 3 Series anywhere else until the action movie franchise that isn't remotely about cars anymore put them on. It's funny how certain corners of the JDM community cannot fathom the idea of owning a German car, like Nissan wasn't trying to emulate exactly that back then, and they were low-key doing a better job at it. The Skylines had all-wheel drive. They were already throwing turbos at the engines, introducing new tech like infotainment screens and rear wheel steering, and they were sounding and looking good while doing it compared to, say, an E36 M3 whose interior looked like this and whose engine was, at least in our market, rather underpowered. Even in markets where the E36 M3 had 0.2 liters more of displacement for a little more torque, little more horsepower, the R34 had 2 more turbos, and they were putting belt to ass. What I struggle to understand though is how we equate the new R35 GTR to a premium sedan that happened to have an overbuilt engine and some cool tech. Stay with me, we're still still talking about Skylines. Lock in. Most of the media we consumed in America that involved the Skyline was of the R34 Skyline and maybe the R33 Skyline GTRs, which only came in the two-door variant. But in reality, these are just two-door sedans. It's not like getting rid of the rear doors for a longer front door and modifying the roofline saved any significant amount of weight. And it's not like the length of the wheelbase changed either. It's just a two-door sedan, just like its modern counterpart and just like the M3 and M4. For the R35 GTR though, they built a dedicated sports car, threw the inline six out of the window, threw affordability out of the window, gave it a twin-turbo V6 that doesn't sound at all like the old car, and they ditched the manual transmission for a newly developed dual-clutch transmission. But I'm genuinely not trying to talk shit about the GTR, and I hope it doesn't come across that way. It got an engine that wasn't just overbuilt like the RVs, but a platform that would go further than probably even the engineers ever saw coming. You got a car that was legitimately better than supercars in certain aspects, had even more technology than the GTRs of old, and was still a tuner's playground. But it'll never be the rightful successor to the Skyline, and it came at a price point that made that clear. You can't just put a badge on something and call a club a spade. That's like if Toyota threw a Supra badge on the GR GT, or better yet, if Toyota brought the FT1 to market without much change with an entirely new 3JZ to smack down on supercars, and sold it for what, if we're being realistic, would have to have been $120,000. Far beyond what the Supras of the 90s costed, even adjusted for inflation. The GR GT is their modern R35 GTR, except they aren't relying on a legacy badge and styling to sell it. And you might be thinking, well, they stopped selling the Skyline, so surely the GTR is the successor. Except they didn't stop selling the Skyline. And these days, the Skyline still is what it always has been, an affordable-ish premium sedan that aims to compete with the Germans that we know in the States as the Infiniti G35 and the Q50. No, those are actually Infinitis. Infiniti is a marketing psyop to sell more Nissans to Americans. In Japan, they're Nissan Skylines. The Q50 and Q60 are the Skyline. The Q70 is the Fuga. The Q50 is the Skyline crossover. And the QX80 is a Nissan Patrol. Cry about it. Did you seriously think the Skyline lineage just took a break in 2002 and then came back 4 years later as the GTR?
What the hell?
No! That was Nissan turning the GTR badge into something that it never was, yet something that lived up to the unrealistic hype of fanboys who can no longer afford it. Because if we're being real, y'all wouldn't have went for a G35 with a GTR badge and a VR38. I would have, but I'm not your conventional JDM fanboy. So a year after the R34 was discontinued, the V35 Skyline came out, or what we know as the Infiniti G35. And if we're being fair, new Nissan Skylines or Infiniti G35s and Q50s don't really live up to the Skyline legacy. I think Skylines just peaked in the 90s then went downhill. As Infiniti here in America, I think they're just one of those cars that are doomed to pseudo-luxury purgatory like Acura, where they look damn good, don't get me wrong, but they aren't really as nice or as capable as the luxury cars of the same class. And Nissan can't really offer a new Skyline GTR to actually compete with the M3 because it would just be a marketing disaster. It would be doomed to only sell in Japan. It would either taint the legacy or even be overshadowed by the legacy of the R35. And honestly, it would be too little too late for the Infiniti Q50. It should have happened back when the V35 was brand new. And what, are they just gonna offer a Q50 Red Sport Plus Plus for the American market, or are they gonna finally bring the Skyline here? Nissan can't even afford to take such bold risks on high-end, low-volume flagship cars right now. They almost got bought out by Honda. The GTR also just became overly expensive as well. It's no longer a cool, fun yet usable, sporty yet attainable sedan. It's straight up a 911 turbo competitor. When I drove a GTR, that was genuinely the closest comparison I could make out of all the other cars I've driven. Certainly not similar to a V35 Skyline slash G35 or a V36 Skyline slash Q50. At its very cheapest in 2024 when it was last sold, it was $121,000. Even the R34 Skyline GTR at 5.4 million yen in 2000, which would have been roughly $49,000 at the time, and adjusted for inflation, that'd be like $94,000, which is only a couple grand more expensive than an M4 Competition X-Drive, which just so happens to be almost $30,000 cheaper than an R35 GTR in its cheapest form the last year it was sold. And the V-Spec and M-Spec Nur and other more limited hardcore versions kind of track with the CS and CSL. And I don't know if y'all have ever been in a G8X, but they kind of pull like a GTR too. Because a lot of American and Japanese car guys try so hard to not give BMW their flowers for the S58. It makes horsepower in the same neighborhood as a GTR. Nissan hasn't done something like this since, well, the RB. And do not get on this app and act like the VR30 is of the same caliber as the S58. It's B58 at best. I know you probably got that one friend that made 700 horsepower from his Q50, but I guarantee you for each 700 horsepower Q50 or Z you can find me, there's at least 10 S58s doing the same thing more reliably. reliably. One time a shop was purposely searching for the limit of the stock block, and it required them to throw nitrous at it to blow it up at 1300 horsepower. Nitrous? That's some Fast and Furious shit that people would have been doing to the RBs back in the day. They're even doing the same mods: heads, intake manifolds, single turbo, port injection, crazy sounding blow-off valve, and they aren't even having to build the motors to keep up with exotics in a car that shares DNA with this and costs a third of what these supercars do. Sound familiar? The late stage GTR ended up becoming what it tried to defeat. By its final years of production, it just became an overpriced sports car with no real updates that all the other companies finally caught up to, and it didn't even have the essence and identity of the Skyline to fall back on. They kept trying to change bumpers, headlights, and taillights, revise the interiors, and give it slightly more horsepower to squeeze out as many sales as they could before bankruptcy. Neither the Skyline nor the GTR hold the same cultural significance as they used to anymore. And there are new platforms that actually offer an all-wheel drive, rev-happy, twin-turbo, inline 6, made it to an optional manual, have a more affordable 4-cylinder option, a middle-of-the-lane single-turbo 6-cylinder, a hardcore track-focused version, sedan, wagon, and coupe variants, rear-wheel and all-wheel drive options, and even a convertible version. We're no longer talking about the Skylines. We're talking about the G2 X3 and 4 series and the G8 M3 and M4. The GTR doesn't have the same hype it used to, nor does the Skyline still hold the same cultural relevance. And the new kids on the block want the new tuner-friendly twin-turbo inline 6 sedan that can take down supercars, take a ton of horsepower, and has all the latest tech and nicest interior for significantly less money than a supercar. In terms of pop culture as well as modern performance and versatility, the G2 X3 and 4 series as well as the G8 M3 and M4 are the new Skyline. And Skyline and GTR fanboys won't be able to see that until 20 years from now, after the M3 loses a bit of its identity and the G80 guys sound just like them.